Look at any clock right now, whichever one is nearest to you, the one on your wall, or the one glowing on your phone, or the one ticking somewhere in the next room. It tells you that a minute has 60 seconds, an hour has 60 minutes, and a day has 24 hours. And you have never once questioned it, because why would you? It feels as natural as sunrise, as fixed as gravity, as old as the world itself. Here is the strange part. None of those numbers come from nature, not the 60, not the 24, not a single one. A minute has 60 seconds because of an accounting habit invented by a civilization that collapsed more than 2,000 years ago. And the reason your clock agrees with a clock 1,000 miles away, down to the exact second, has nothing to do with the sun or the stars. It was a decision made by a handful of men in a single afternoon over the objections of an entire nation. So the truth is stranger than you have been told. Humans did not discover time. They built it, piece by piece, and then they quietly agreed to forget that they had built it at all. Picture a machine so familiar that you have stopped seeing it. That is the clock. And the story of who assembled it and why is a mystery with real suspects, false credits, and a twist that most people get completely wrong. Most people would tell you that time is simply out there, a river flowing whether anyone measures it or not, and that clocks just read it off the way a thermometer reads heat. They would be half right and half wrong, and the wrong half is the interesting one. Yes, the sun rises and sets. Yes, the moon swells and shrinks, and the seasons turn. Those rhythms are real, and every human culture noticed them. But noticing a rhythm is not the same as cutting it into pieces. A day is a thing the planet does. An hour is a thing that people made up. And the moment you start asking where the pieces came from, the comfortable idea that time is natural begins to crack. Start with the simplest question. Why 60? Why not 100 seconds in a minute? A nice round number that would make the math easy. Why does the clock insist on this odd, awkward count that no calculator would ever choose? Pull that single thread, and a 4,000-year-old empire comes unraveling out of it. Before we follow that thread all the way back, do one small thing. Wherever you are right now, take a second and tell everyone in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what your clock says this very minute. There is something fitting about a crowd of strangers scattered across every time zone on Earth, all pausing to compare the same invention at once. Every comment gets read, and it is always a surprise to see who is out there and what hour it is where they are. Now, back to that thread. Why 60? The answer begins in the mud of ancient Mesopotamia, in the land the Babylonians inherited from the Sumerians more than 4,000 years ago. These were people who counted, obsessively and brilliantly, for taxes and harvests and the movements of the sky. But they did not count the way you do. You count in tens, because you have 10 fingers. They counted in 60s. It sounds mad until you try it. Hold up one hand. With the thumb of that hand, touch each of the 3 little bones on your 4 fingers. 3 bones across 4 fingers gives you 12. Now, every time you reach 12, raise 1 finger on the other hand, 5 fingers on that second hand, 12 counted on the first, and you have reached 60 on 2 hands without writing anything down. 60 was not arbitrary to them. It was elegant. It divided cleanly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30, which made splitting things, grain, land, and debts, almost effortless. So when the Babylonian astronomers looked up and tried to carve the sky into pieces, they reached for the number they trusted. They split the circle into 360 parts, which is why a circle still has 360 degrees today. And they split their measurements into 60 smaller parts, and each of those into 60 smaller parts again. Here is the strange part. That empire fell. Babylon crumbled. Its language died. Its gods were forgotten. But the habit survived, passed hand to hand through Greek astronomers, then Islamic scholars, then European monks, none of whom stopped to ask whether 60 still made sense. It simply kept getting copied, and the words for those pieces give the whole secret away. The first small division of an hour, in Latin, was the pars minuta prima, the first small part. Divide again, and you get the pars minuta secunda, the second small part. The names on your clock, minute and second, are literally just Latin for the first little piece and the second little piece. And that is the part almost no one gets right. When you say it is quarter past, you are speaking a dead language, using the counting system of a vanished civilization and calling it nature. So the 60 is Babylonian. But that only explains the small pieces. It does not explain the big ones. Why 24 hours? Why split the day and the night the way we do? For that, the trail leads somewhere older and stranger, up the Nile. The ancient Egyptians were watchers of the sky, and they had a peculiar way of telling time at night. They chose a series of star groups, which we now call decans, that rose in sequence across the darkness. As each one climbed over the horizon, another slice of the night had passed. Across a full night, in the right season, about 12 of these star groups would make their appearance. So the night became 12 parts. Not because 12 is natural, but because that is roughly how many of their chosen stars paraded past before dawn. During the day, of course, those same stars were drowned in sunlight and useless, which is one reason the Egyptians needed other tools to carry the count through the daylight. They measured the day with shadow. Picture a simple stick or a towering obelisk throwing a long shadow at dawn, a short one at noon, and a long one again at dusk. They divided the daylight into portions too, and to match the 12 of the night, they landed on 12 for the day as well. So the day had 12 parts, and the night had 12, and that balance of 12 against 12 is the reason your clock face still runs to 12 rather than to 10, and your day still splits into 2 sets of 12 rather than one clean run of 24. So already the picture is falling apart. The 60 comes from Babylon, the 24 comes from Egypt, and neither one came from any law of the universe. They came from fingers and stars and shadows, from people solving practical problems with the tools they had. But even this is not the strangest thing they left you, because for most of human history, an hour was not even a fixed length at all. Here is where it gets genuinely disorienting. Imagine an hour that grew longer in summer and shrank in winter. It did not just feel longer, it was longer, measurably and officially, by the reckoning of the day. For thousands of years, across Egypt, Greece, Rome, and deep into medieval Europe, people used what are now called seasonal hours, or temporal hours. The rule was simple, and to them, obvious. Take the daylight, however much there was, and cut it into 12 equal parts. Take the night, whatever was left, and cut it into 12 as well. But daylight is not the same length all year. On a long June day, there is far more sunlight to divide, so each of those 12 daytime hours stretched out, long and generous. On a short December day, the same 12 hours got squeezed into a thin ribbon of light, each one brief. In a place at the latitude of Rome, a summer daytime hour could run close to 75 of your minutes, while a winter daytime hour might shrink to around 45. And the night hours did the exact reverse, swelling in winter and shrinking in summer. So picture a Roman waking to a summer dawn. The first hour of his day was a long, unhurried thing. The same first hour in December was a short, cold sliver. His hours breathed with the seasons, and nobody found this strange, because to them, the whole point of an hour was to divide the working light, not to measure a fixed slice of the universe. An hour meant a 12th of the useful day, and the useful day changed, so the hour changed with it. Which is why the clocks you would recognize, the ones with steady, identical ticks, were almost useless to them at first. A machine that chopped time into equal, unchanging pieces was solving a problem that most people did not think they had. And so, for most of the human story, there was simply no such thing as a fixed hour. The hour you treat as a hard, unbending unit is a recent invention, and it only won because a machine finally came along and forced everyone to agree. Long before that machine, people had already tried to trap the hour inside other devices, and the way they failed is its own clue. They built water clocks, letting a steady drip fill or empty a vessel, marking the passing hours by the rising or falling level. The Egyptians used them, the Greeks refined them, and Roman courts used them to ration how long a speaker was allowed to talk. They burned marked candles and watched the flame eat down through the hours, and in other parts of the world, people burned measured trails of incense to smell the time slipping past. These were clever machines, some of them beautiful. But notice what their makers asked of them. They often marked those water clocks and candles to match the seasonal hours, adjusting them through the year so the device would agree with the stretching and shrinking day. The machine bent to the sun, not the other way around. For all their ingenuity, no one had yet dared to build a clock that would tell the sun it was wrong. That machine, when it finally came, was the mechanical clock, and it arrived in Europe in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, often in the towers of monasteries and town squares. Monks needed to pray at fixed points through the day and the night, and ringing the right bell at the right moment was serious business. In fact, the word clock comes from old words for bell, because the earliest clocks did not show you the time so much as sound it out across the rooftops. These first machines were crude. Many had no minute hand at all, because minutes did not yet matter to a world that still thought in the swelling and shrinking hours of the sun. But a mechanical clock has one stubborn quality. It does not care about the seasons. Its gears turn at a constant rate, so it ticks out equal hours whether it is June or December, whether the sun is up or hidden. Slowly, town by town, the machine's rigid, unchanging hour began to overwrite the sun's flexible one. The clock did not read the time, it redefined it. By the time better clocks arrived, and especially after the pendulum clock of the 1650s made timekeeping accurate enough to finally trust a minute hand, the fixed hour had won. People began to live by the machine rather than by the light. And living by the machine changed people in ways they never chose. Once the hour was fixed and identical, it could be counted, and once it could be counted, it could be sold. Work that had once followed the daylight and the task now followed the clock on the wall. You began to be paid for hours rather than for a job done, and you could be fined for arriving a few of those hours late. Bells that had once called monks to prayer now called workers to the factory floor. The fixed hour did not just tell people the time, it quietly rearranged their days, their wages, and even the rhythm of their bodies, all in the name of a unit that nature never issued. And for a long time, even these proud machines had to bow to the sun. Early clocks drifted badly, gaining or losing many minutes a day, so towns kept resetting them against a sundial or a marked noon line on a wall. The moment the shadow said it was truly midday. The most advanced timekeeping machine of its age was humbled every few days by a stick and a shadow. The clock told the hours, but the sun still corrected the clock, which meant the old, local, sun-given time was not gone at all. It was hiding inside every clock in every town, waiting to become the very problem that would finally break the system. Because there was still one enormous crack in the whole arrangement, and almost nobody noticed it, since for most of history it did not matter. Every town kept its own time. Think about what a clock actually did before the modern age. It told you the local hour, and the local hour meant one thing above all. Noon was the moment the sun stood highest over your particular rooftop, but the sun does not stand highest over every rooftop at once. As the earth turns, noon sweeps across the land from east to west. So noon in one town, arrived minutes before noon in the town down the road, and minutes after noon in the town behind it. For thousands of years this was invisible. If it took you 2 days on horseback to reach the next city, who on earth would notice that its clocks ran a few minutes off from yours? Every place set its clocks by its own sun, and every place was right, and the little differences melted into the slowness of travel. There was no single correct time. There were thousands of correct times, one for every town with a sundial. So here is the question this whole mystery has been building toward. If time itself was this loose, this local, this scattered across the map, then who reached in and forced all those clocks to agree? Who decided that your clock and a clock 500 miles away should read the very same second? It was not a scientist. It was not a king. It was not, at first, even a government. The trail leads somewhere far stranger than that. If this is pulling you in, and you want the exact moment the whole invisible system finally snapped into place, that is precisely where this is going next. The subscribe button keeps stories like this one coming, so the next hidden history does not slip quietly past you. Because what happened next is the twist that almost everyone gets wrong. The thing that forced the clocks to agree was not the heavens. It was the railroad. For all of human history, travel had been slow enough to hide the problem. But the railroad shattered that. Suddenly a train could carry you across 100 miles in a couple of hours, fast enough that the little local differences in time stopped being invisible and started being dangerous. Imagine you are a station master in the 1870s in the United States. A train is coming down the line, and you need to know exactly when. But the town it left runs on its own local sun time. The town it is heading to runs on a different one, and the railroad company operating the train may keep yet another time entirely, based on some distant headquarters. At the peak of the confusion, the country ran on a tangle of local times, and the railroad stacked on top of that dozens of their own competing time standards. A single long journey might cross through a bewildering series of clock changes, none of them agreeing. This was not merely confusing, it was deadly. Two trains running on two slightly different clocks, on the same stretch of track, do not need much disagreement to arrive at the same place, at the same terrible moment. Railroad managers understood this in their bones, because they had already buried the results of it. When schedules depend on clocks, and the clocks disagree, trains meet where they were never meant to meet. The looseness that had been harmless in the age of the horse became, in the age of the locomotive, a steady source of collisions. The scattered, local, natural time that had served humanity for thousands of years suddenly could not keep up with a machine that moved faster than the sun's shadow could creep across the land. So the railroads decided to fix it themselves. It was not the government that stepped in, and it was not scientists. It was the railroad companies, men whose real concern was timetables and collisions and profit, not the philosophy of time. They agreed to carve the country into a handful of broad zones, and inside each zone every clock would read the same, regardless of where the sun actually stood. A vast stretch of the continent would simply agree to pretend, together, that it was the same time everywhere within the line. And these were real people, with real names, not some faceless committee of history. Years earlier, a schoolteacher named Charles Dowd had sketched out almost exactly this idea, a map of the country sliced into neat time belts, and had pushed the railroads to adopt it. A Canadian engineer named Sanford Fleming had been campaigning to put the whole world on a single standard time and a 24-hour clock. But the man who actually engineered the switch, who drew the final lines and set the day, was a railway official named William Allen, who ran the guide the railroads used to publish their schedules. He was not a scientist who uncovered a law of nature. He was a timetable man who decided a nation should share one clock, and then talked an industry into obeying him, and then they set a date to switch. In the United States, that date was the 18th of November, 1883. On that day, At time signals sent by telegraph, cities across the country reset their clocks to the new standard zone time. In many places, the old local sun time and the new railroad time did not match. So clocks were pushed forward or dragged back. And in city after city, people lived through what became known as the Day of Two Noons. Noon arrived once by the old sun, and then a second time, minutes later, by the new decree, or the reverse, a noon that came and went and was then called back to be lived again. Picture that. An entire nation, on a single ordinary autumn day, agreeing to change what time it was. Not because the sun moved, not because science demanded it, but because a private industry drew lines on a map and told the clocks to obey. The following year, the wider world took the same logic global. In 1884, delegates from many nations gathered in Washington and agreed to hang the entire planet's clocks from a single starting line for longitude, the meridian running through Greenwich, near London. One reference line, so that every country could measure its time from the same fixed point. Here is the strange part. Not everyone obeyed, at least not willingly. Some cities resisted, insisting on their own true sun time, offended by the very idea that a railroad could tell them which hour to live in. Newspapers argued over it. A number of places clung to their local time for years afterward, because on some level people understood exactly what was being taken from them. Their time, the honest time of their own sky, was being replaced by an agreement, a convenient fiction, imposed for the sake of trains. And it was only decades later, in 1918, with the Standard Time Act, that the government of the United States finally made official what the railroads had already forced into being. The law did not invent standard time. It simply admitted that a private industry had already invented it and made it binding. So the twist at the heart of the mystery is this: the synchronized, standardized time that now rules your entire life. The time that lets a call connect across oceans to the exact second. The time your alarm and your job and your train all obey without question was not discovered in nature and was not handed down by any authority of the heavens. It was engineered by businessmen to stop trains from crashing, and that is the part almost no one gets right. And the strangeness did not stop in the age of steam. Today the second, the smallest familiar piece of your day, is no longer tied to the sun or the earth's spin at all. It is officially defined by counting the vibrations of a single kind of atom, more than 9 billion of them, ticking away in laboratories built to be steadier than the turning of the planet itself. The Earth, it turns out, is a slightly sloppy clock, wobbling and slowing by tiny amounts, so humans quietly cut the cord and tied the second to something more reliable than the world. Your second is now a count of atomic flickers that you will never see and could never feel. The unit could hardly be more precise, and it could hardly be less natural. So why does it feel so natural? Why, after all of this, does the clock on your wall still seem as fixed and as eternal as the tides? Because that is what a good invention does. It disappears. The moment everyone agrees to a fiction and lives inside it and builds their days around it, the fiction stops feeling invented and starts feeling like the floor beneath their feet. You inherited the 60 from Babylon, the 24 from Egypt, the fixed hour from a monastery bell, and the synchronized minute from a railroad timetable, and you inherited all of it so seamlessly that it never once occurred to you to ask where any of it came from. The seams were sanded away by time, which is a fitting joke when you sit with it. And here is what makes the whole story worth telling. The clock is not the only thing like this. Look around at your ordinary day, and you will find it is full of inventions wearing the mask of nature. The 7-day week, which matches no rhythm of the sun or the moon, the 12 months, and the leap day squeezed in every 4 years to patch the gap between the calendar and the real journey of the earth. The lines on the map that decide which country you belong to. The very idea that a year should begin in the dead of winter. So many of the things you treat as simply the way the world is were, at some point, a decision that someone made, an argument that someone won, a convenient fiction that outlived the people who first agreed to it. The people who invented time were not wise elders reading the secrets of the cosmos. They were counters and priests and astronomers, and in the end, they were railroad men. They were solving today's problem with yesterday's tools, and they had no idea that you would still be living inside their answers thousands of years later, glancing at your phone, certain that a minute has always had 60 seconds and always will. So the next time you catch yourself running late, watching the seconds tick down, feeling that the clock is some hard and ancient master you have no choice but to obey, remember what it actually is. It is a 4,000-year-old counting habit, a count of stars over the Nile, a monastery bell, and a truce between trains. It is a story that humans told themselves so well that they forgot they were the ones telling it. Which leaves one honest question, and it is a good one for the comments. Now that you know your clock is an invention and not a law of nature, does it change how it feels to look at it, or does the fiction keep its grip on you exactly as tightly as before? A simple yes or no is all it takes, and if you have a story about a time your own clock and someone else's flatly refused to agree, that one is even better. Until the next hidden history turns up inside something you were sure you already understood, keep looking twice at the ordinary.